The numbers that split atoms still run your bank account. I spent 3 years at Los Alamos calculating how much uranium would turn a city into vapor. Clean equations, precise measurements, mathematics so pure it could erase 100,000 lives in seconds. We called it the Manhattan Project. But what we really built was a new kind of math. Most people think nuclear weapons were just about physics. Splitting atoms, chain reactions, big explosions. They never ask about the calculations behind it all. The probability matrices, the optimization algorithms, the statistical models that determined how much fissile material you needed, where to place it, when to detonate it for maximum effect. Those same mathematical principles didn't disappear when the war ended. They evolved. They spread. They became the invisible architecture of everything you interact with today. Your credit score, stock market algorithms, weather prediction, internet routing, even the way your phone decides which tower to connect to. The apocalypse math never went away. It just learned to wear a suit. Before we continue, take a moment to notice where you're listening from, and if this story stays with you, you're welcome to return tomorrow for what comes next. I still have my Los Alamos security badge. Badge number 2847. The plastic is yellowed now, cracked at the edges, but the photograph shows a young man with thick glasses and the kind of confidence that comes from never having seen mathematics fail. I was 24 years old when I first clipped that badge to my shirt pocket in September 1943. Fresh off the train from Princeton with a PhD in applied mathematics and absolutely no idea what I was walking into. The badge meant access. Access to the most classified calculations in human history. Access to problems that had never been solved because they had never needed to be solved. Access to a community of brilliant minds working on what we were told was the most important mathematical challenge of our time. What they didn't tell us, what none of us understood then, was that we weren't just building a weapon. We were building the mathematical foundation for everything that would come after. The train ride to New Mexico took 2 days. I spent most of it reading Courant and Hilbert's Methods of Mathematical Physics, trying to prepare for whatever awaited me. I knew it involved physics. I knew it was urgent. I knew it was secret. That was all any of us knew before we arrived. Los Alamos in 1943 was a construction site masquerading as a town. Mud everywhere, half-finished buildings, scientists in work boots trudging between laboratories that looked like temporary sheds. And in those sheds, the most sophisticated mathematical work being done anywhere on Earth. I met Oppenheimer on my second day. He was younger than I expected, with those piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through whatever problem was in front of him. He walked me through the theoretical physics division, introducing me to names I'd only read in journals. Fermi, who spoke quietly but whose every word carried the weight of absolute certainty. Teller, who gestured wildly while explaining concepts that stretched mathematics to its breaking point. Beth, who could solve in his head what took the rest of us hours with our slide rules. We need mathematicians, Oppenheimer told me that first day. Not just people who can calculate, but people who can think about calculation itself. We're facing problems that don't have established methods. You'll need to invent the mathematics as you go. He wasn't exaggerating. The central challenge was deceptively simple to state. How do you make a nuclear chain reaction happen fast enough to release enormous energy before the material blows itself apart? But solving it required mathematical techniques that didn't exist yet. I was assigned to work on what they called the implosion problem. The idea was elegant in principle. Instead of firing one piece of fissile material into another, you would compress a sphere of plutonium so rapidly and uniformly that it achieved critical density before it could expand. The mathematics involved three-dimensional fluid dynamics, shockwave propagation, and statistical mechanics all happening simultaneously. My slide rule became my most treasured possession. A couple and Esser log-log duplex decitric, 16 inches of bamboo and celluloid that could handle logarithms, trigonometric functions, and exponentials with enough precision for our work. I'd inherited it from my advisor at Princeton, and it had the kind of smooth action that came from years of careful use. Every morning I checked that all the scales aligned perfectly before beginning my calculations. The work itself was unlike anything I'd experienced. In graduate school, mathematics had been pure, abstract, beautiful for its own sake. Here, every equation had weight, literal weight. We were calculating how much plutonium you needed, how to shape it, how to detonate it. The mathematics was still beautiful, but it was beauty in service of destruction. I remember the first time I calculated a complete implosion sequence. Dozens of pages of equations, modeling the shock wave as it traveled inward, the density as it increased, the probability of achieving critical mass. When I reached the final number, the expected energy release, I stared at it for a long time. That number represented the power to level a city. But what struck me even more
was the mathematics itself. We were developing new ways to solve optimization problems under constraints, new methods for statistical analysis of uncertain systems, new computational techniques for handling massive calculations that pushed our mechanical aids to their limits. Without realizing it, we were creating the mathematical toolkit that would eventually run the modern world.
The collaborative atmosphere was unlike anything in academic mathematics. Ideas flowed freely between disciplines. A conversation with a physicist about neutron behavior would spark a new mathematical approach.
A chemist's question about material properties would lead to breakthrough insights about statistical modeling. The urgency of the work broke down the usual academic boundaries. We worked 16-hour days, 6 days a week. My corner of the theoretical division was cluttered with calculation sheets, each page covered with equations in my careful handwriting. Coffee stains marked the most difficult problems, the ones that required hours of sustained concentration.
I developed a system of notation that let me track multiple variables across dozens of pages of calculation.
The security was absolute. We couldn't talk about our work outside the laboratory. We couldn't keep notes at home. Everything stayed within the boundaries of Los Alamos. But within those boundaries, we shared everything. Every insight, every breakthrough, every elegant solution became part of the collective knowledge. By early 1944, I began to understand that we were creating something larger than we'd intended. The mathematical methods we were developing for nuclear weapons had applications far beyond warfare. The optimization techniques we used to maximize explosive yield could optimize any complex system. The statistical methods we developed to handle uncertainty in nuclear reactions could handle uncertainty in any domain. The computational approaches we created to manage massive calculations could manage any large-scale mathematical problem. I started keeping informal notes about these broader applications, not for any official purpose, just my own curiosity about where our methods might lead. How could you use nuclear targeting algorithms to route communications? How might our statistical models apply to financial markets? How could our optimization techniques improve industrial processes? The questions fascinated me because the mathematics was so powerful, so general, so applicable beyond its original purpose. We were working on the most destructive weapon in human history, but we were also accidentally creating the mathematical foundation for a technological revolution that none of us could yet imagine. Late at night, after finishing my official calculations, I would sometimes work through these theoretical applications. The mathematics was the same. The principles were identical. Only the application changed. What could destroy a city could also connect the world, manage global commerce, or optimize any complex system. I was beginning to understand that mathematical innovation has a life of its own. You cannot contain it to its original purpose. You cannot prevent it from spreading to new domains. You cannot control what other minds will do with the tools you create. The ball was just the beginning. I still have some of my original calculation sheets from Los Alamos, pages and pages of spherical implosion equations, handwritten in the careful script I developed for mathematical work. Coffee rings stain the corners where I set my cup down during those long nights when a single miscalculation could mean the difference between success and failure. Each page is stamped top secret in red ink that has faded to rust brown over the decades. Looking at those equations now, I can still remember the moment when I first understood what we were really doing. We weren't just building a bigger bomb. We were creating mathematics for the impossible. The problem of nuclear fission had never been solved because it had never existed before. You cannot look up the optimal configuration for a plutonium implosion device in any textbook. There is no established method for calculating the precise timing required to compress fissile material to critical density before it destroys itself. We were working at the absolute edge of human knowledge, and the mathematics had to be perfect. Consider the basic challenge. A sphere of plutonium, about the size of a softball, surrounded by conventional explosives. When those explosives detonate, they must create a perfectly uniform shockwave that compresses the plutonium core to twice its normal density in less than a microsecond. Any asymmetry, any timing error of even a few nanoseconds, and instead of a nuclear explosion, you get what we called a fizzle, a conventional blast that scatters radioactive material without achieving critical mass. The mathematics required to solve this problem drew from every branch of mathematical physics. Partial differential equations to model the shockwave propagation, statistical mechanics to predict neutron behavior, probability theory to calculate the likelihood of achieving critical mass, optimization techniques to determine the ideal explosive configuration, and all of it had to be computed by hand, with slide rules and mechanical calculators, because electronic computers didn't exist yet. I spent weeks developing what I privately called the probability cascade equations.
These were formulas that predicted how likely a nuclear chain reaction was to sustain itself based on the density and configuration of this fissile material. Each neutron released in fission has a certain probability of causing another fission event. Model enough of these interactions, and you can predict whether you'll get a sustained reaction or just a expensive dud.
The equations were beautiful in their mathematical elegance, each term balanced against the others in perfect harmony. But the physical reality they described was terrifying.
Every variable represented the potential to vaporize a city. Every calculation brought us closer to unleashing the most destructive force humans had ever created.
I remember working late one night on what we called the compression optimization problem. The question was simple to ask. Given a fixed amount of conventional explosive, what is the optimal way to arrange it around a plutonium core to achieve maximum compression? But answering it required solving a three-dimensional optimization problem with dozens of variables and constraints. I filled 17 pages with calculations that night. The mathematics involved advanced calculus, differential geometry, and techniques from the calculus of variations that I had learned in graduate school but never applied to anything practical. The solution, when I finally reached it, specified the precise shape and timing for 32 separate explosive charges arranged around the plutonium sphere. The emotional weight of that calculation hit me as I wrote down the final numbers. Those equations, if implemented correctly, would create an explosion equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT. Every element of the mathematical solution contributed directly to destruction on an unprecedented scale. But even as I grappled with the moral implications, I was fascinated by the mathematical innovations we were creating. The techniques we developed for solving optimization problems under extreme constraints were completely general. The statistical methods we created for handling uncertainty in nuclear reactions could be applied to any system with probabilistic behavior. The computational approaches we invented for managing complex calculations could tackle any large-scale mathematical problem. Working with Fermi taught me to think about mathematics differently. He had an intuitive understanding of how different mathematical approaches could be combined to solve novel problems. Watching him work, I learned to see connections between seemingly unrelated mathematical techniques. A method from fluid dynamics might provide insight into a statistical mechanics problem. A technique from differential equations might unlock an optimization challenge. Von Neumann pushed us even further. He understood that the mathematical methods we were developing had implications far beyond nuclear weapons. During one late-night discussion about neutron diffusion equations, he mentioned how similar techniques might be used to model the flow of information through communication networks. He spoke casually about mathematical approaches that wouldn't become practical for decades. But his insight was prophetic. The collaboration between mathematicians, physicists, chemists, and engineers created an environment where mathematical innovation flourished. Ideas cross-pollinated freely. A physicist's insight about neutron behavior would inspire a new mathematical approach. An engineer's practical constraint would lead to a breakthrough in optimization theory. The urgent deadline forced us to be creative, to find mathematical solutions that no one had ever needed before. I developed what I called convergence acceleration techniques, methods for solving iterative calculations faster when you needed answers under severe time pressure. These weren't just computational tricks. They were mathematically rigorous approaches to convergence problems that could be applied to any iterative mathematical process. I used them to calculate critical mass requirements, but the techniques themselves were completely general. The statistical work was perhaps the most innovative. Nuclear fission involves billions of random interactions between particles. Predicting the behavior of such a system requires sophisticated statistical models that can handle vast numbers of probabilistic events. We developed new approaches to Monte Carlo methods, new techniques for statistical sampling, new ways to extract reliable predictions from inherently random systems. Every breakthrough felt like a double-edged sword. Each mathematical innovation brought us closer to ending the war, but also closer to demonstrating humanity's capacity for unprecedented destruction. The beauty of the mathematics was inseparable from the horror of its application. The hardest calculations involved what we called yield optimization, determining how to get maximum explosive energy from a given amount of fissile material. This required balancing dozens of competing factors: neutron absorption rates, critical geometry, timing, precision, material purity. The mathematical relationships were extraordinarily complex, but the goal was brutally simple: kill more people with less uranium. I spent months refining these calculations. Each iteration brought small improvements in predicted yield. Each improvement meant a larger explosion, a wider radius of destruction, more lives ended by our mathematical precision. The numbers were abstract, but their physical meaning was concrete and horrifying. Yet I could not deny the intellectual satisfaction of solving problems that pushed mathematics to its absolute limits. We were creating new mathematical knowledge at a pace that would have been impossible in peacetime. The combination of brilliant minds, unlimited resources, and desperate urgency produced mathematical innovations that normally would have taken decades to develop. As 1,944 turned into 1,945, it became clear that our mathematical work was nearing completion. The calculations were converging on a design that would work. But I was also beginning to understand that the mathematical methods we had created would outlive the weapons they were designed to build. The optimization techniques, statistical models, and computational approaches we had developed were too powerful, too general, too useful to be confined to nuclear weapons. Someone would find other applications. The mathematical innovations would spread. The equations we wrote to split atoms would eventually split and spread into every corner of human technological civilization. The ENIAC programming cards arrived at Los Alamos in early 1945, just months before Trinity. Stacks of punched cardboard, each one representing a single instruction for the electronic numerical integrator and computer being built at the University of Pennsylvania. I held those cards in my hands and knew I was touching the future of mathematics. We had been doing all our calculations by hand, with slide rules and mechanical desk calculators, thousands of hours of human computation for every major calculation. But these cards represented something unprecedented. A machine that could perform mathematical operations automatically, following a sequence of instructions punched into cardboard. The irony was not lost on me. The same mathematical urgency that drove us to create nuclear weapons was now driving us to create the first programmable computers. The calculations required for nuclear physics were so complex, so time-consuming, so prone to human error, that they demanded a new kind of mathematical tool. We needed machines that could think mathematically. The Trinity test came first. The 16th of July, 1945, 5:29 a.m., Alamogordo, New Mexico. I watched from a bunker 20 miles away as our mathematics became physical reality. The flash lit up the desert like a second sunrise. The shock wave rattled the ground beneath our feet. The mushroom cloud rose into the dawn sky like a monument to human mathematical achievement. In that moment, I felt the full weight of what we had accomplished. Every equation I had written, every optimization I had calculated, every statistical model I had developed had contributed to that explosion. The mathematics was perfect. The destruction was absolute. And I knew that both the mathematics and the capacity for destruction would spread far beyond anything we could control. But even as we celebrated the successful test, I was thinking about those ENIAC cards. The same mathematical principles we had used to design nuclear weapons could be programmed into electronic computers. The optimization algorithms, statistical models, and computational techniques we had developed could be automated, accelerated, and applied to problems we hadn't even imagined yet. After the war ended, I was recruited by the Moore School of Electrical Engineering at the University of Pennsylvania to work on ENIAC programming. The transition from nuclear weapons to electronic computers felt natural because the underlying mathematics was the same. The techniques we had developed for solving complex optimization problems could be programmed into the machine. The statistical methods we had created for handling uncertainty could be automated. ENIAC was a marvel of engineering, but programming, it was still largely a matter of mathematical intuition. You had to understand not just what calculation you wanted to perform, but how to break it down into the primitive operations the machine could execute. Setting up the program required physically connecting cables and setting switches, then feeding in the punched cards that told the machine what to do. I spent weeks programming ENIAC to solve optimization problems similar to those we had tackled at Los Alamos. Instead of optimizing explosive configurations, I was optimizing industrial processes, logistics networks, resource allocation problems. The mathematics was identical, only the application had changed. Working with John von Neumann on the ENIAC project deepened my understanding of how our nuclear weapons mathematics would reshape the world. Von Neumann saw connections that the rest of us missed. He understood that the mathematical techniques we had developed for nuclear physics were general-purpose tools for solving any complex optimization problem. "We have created something more powerful than atomic weapons," he told me during one late-night programming session. "We have created mathematical methods that can optimize any system, solve any large-scale calculation, handle any complex statistical problem. These techniques will transform every aspect of human civilization." He was right. The programming cards I worked with represented the beginning of a mathematical revolution. Every algorithm we programmed into ENIAC carried the DNA of our nuclear weapons work. The optimization routines were descended from our explosive configuration calculations. The statistical analysis programs were evolved versions of our neutron behavior models. The computational approaches were refined versions of our critical mass calculations. The electronic computer amplified our mathematical innovations exponentially. Calculations that had taken us weeks to complete by hand could now be finished in hours. More importantly, the computer made it possible to explore mathematical approaches that were too complex for human calculation. We could now solve optimization problems with hundreds of variables, analyze statistical systems with millions of interactions, handle computational challenges that would have been impossible with slide rules and mechanical calculators. I remember the first time I programmed ENIAC to solve a resource allocation problem for a manufacturing company. The mathematical structure was nearly identical to problems we had solved for optimizing uranium enrichment. But instead of maximizing nuclear yield, we were maximizing production efficiency. The algorithm found solutions that surprised even me, configurations that no human planner would have considered, but that were mathematically optimal. That's when I fully understood the transformative power of what we had created. Our nuclear weapons mathematics, programmed into electronic computers, could optimize any complex system. Supply chains, communication networks, financial portfolios, industrial processes, any domain that involved multiple variables, constraints, and competing objectives could benefit from our mathematical methods. The spread of these techniques was inevitable. Other mathematicians and engineers quickly recognized the potential of computer-based optimization. Research institutions began recruiting former weapons scientists to work on civilian applications. Private companies started investing in electronic computers to gain competitive advantages through mathematical optimization. I consulted with early computer companies, helping them understand how to apply the mathematical techniques we had developed. The conversations always followed the same pattern. A business executive would describe a complex operational challenge: how to route delivery trucks efficiently, how to schedule production optimally, how to manage inventory effectively. I would explain how the problem could be formulated mathematically and solved using techniques derived from our nuclear weapons work. The executives were fascinated, but largely unaware of the mathematical lineage. They saw the results: dramatic improvements in efficiency, cost savings, competitive advantages. But they didn't understand that the algorithms powering these improvements were descended from calculations originally designed to maximize nuclear destruction. Programming ENIAC taught me that mathematical innovation has an unstoppable momentum. You cannot contain powerful mathematical techniques to their original domain. You cannot prevent them from spreading to new applications. You cannot control how other minds will use the tools you create. The punch cards themselves became symbols of this mathematical evolution. Each card represented a single instruction, but together they formed programs that could solve problems across every domain of human activity. The same mathematical logic that had optimized nuclear explosions could now optimize anything that could be reduced to mathematical relationships. By 1947, I was working with companies across multiple industries, helping them apply computer-based optimization to their operations. A steel company used our algorithms to optimize furnace operations. A railroad used our methods to improve scheduling. An oil company used our techniques to optimize refinery processes. In every case, the underlying mathematics traced back to our nuclear weapons research. The transformation was accelerating. Each successful application of our mathematical methods inspired new applications. Each new computer installation spread our techniques to additional domains. Each programming breakthrough made our algorithms more powerful and more widely applicable. I began to see a pattern that would define the rest of my career. Mathematical innovations, created for specific, often destructive purposes, inevitably find their way into the infrastructure of civilization. The optimization algorithms we developed to maximize nuclear destruction were becoming the invisible mathematics that optimized modern industrial society. The electronic computer was the vehicle, but our nuclear weapons mathematics was the engine driving a technological transformation that would eventually touch every aspect of human life. We had created the mathematical foundation for the digital age, and there was no way to contain it, control it, or predict all the ways it would reshape the world. The arithmetic of atomic destruction was becoming the arithmetic of everything. The IBM printout arrived on my desk in 1962 with a cover letter from Goldman Sachs. 40 pages of computer-generated stock market analysis using statistical models that I recognized immediately. They were my models. Or rather, they were evolved versions of the probability matrices I had developed at Los Alamos to predict neutron behavior in nuclear chain reactions. Wall Street had discovered our mathematics. The letter was from a young quantitative analyst named David Shaw, who had somehow learned about my background in mathematical optimization. He was polite but direct. Goldman Sachs was recruiting former weapons scientists to apply mathematical modeling to financial markets. They wanted to know if I would consult on developing what they called systematic trading strategies. I spread the printout across my desk and studied the analysis. The mathematical structure was unmistakably descended from our nuclear work. Portfolio optimization using techniques I had originally developed to optimize uranium distribution in reactor cores. Risk assessment models based on statistical methods we had created to predict nuclear reaction probabilities. Correlation analysis using algorithms derived from our neutron diffusion calculations. The irony was profound. Mathematics designed to destroy cities was being used to build financial empires. My first meeting with the Goldman Sachs team took place in a conference room overlooking Manhattan. 6 young men in expensive suits, all with advanced degrees in mathematics or physics, eager to learn how nuclear weapons mathematics could be applied to trading. They spoke the language of optimization theory, statistical mechanics, and computational modeling with the same fluency we had used at Los Alamos. We've studied your publications on optimization under uncertainty, Shaw explained. The mathematical techniques you developed for nuclear physics appear to have direct applications to portfolio management. We're particularly interested in your approach to multivariable optimization with stochastic constraints. I listened to their presentation with fascination and growing unease. They had independently discovered that financial markets could be modeled as complex systems with probabilistic behavior, similar to nuclear reactions. Stock price movements, they argued, followed statistical patterns that could be analyzed using the same mathematical techniques we had developed to predict neutron interactions. The mathematics was sound. A portfolio of stocks was mathematically similar to a configuration of fissile material. Both involved multiple interacting components with probabilistic behavior. Both required optimization under uncertainty. Both could be modeled using statistical mechanics and analyzed using techniques from our nuclear weapons research. Shaw showed me their preliminary results. By applying our optimization algorithms to historical stock data, they had identified trading strategies that consistently outperformed the market. The mathematical models could predict optimal portfolio configurations, calculate risk levels with unprecedented precision, and identify arbitrage opportunities that human traders missed. We call it quantitative finance, Shaw said. Mathematical modeling applied to financial markets. We believe this approach will transform investing from art to science. I agreed to consult with them, partly from curiosity about how our mathematical techniques would perform in this new domain, and partly from a desire to understand the implications of what they were creating. Over the following months, I helped them refine their models, drawing directly on techniques I had developed for nuclear weapons optimization. The parallels were remarkable. Risk assessment in financial markets used the same mathematical framework as uncertainty analysis in nuclear physics. Portfolio diversification followed principles similar to neutron distribution optimization. Trading algorithms implemented decision trees that were structurally identical to the targeting protocols we had developed for nuclear weapons. Working with Goldman Sachs introduced me to a community of former weapons scientists who had migrated to Wall Street. Mathematicians from Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, and Livermore were applying nuclear physics techniques to options pricing, derivatives valuation, and algorithmic trading. The financial industry had become an unexpected destination for nuclear mathematics. I met Jim Simons, a mathematician who had worked on code breaking during the war and was now developing sophisticated trading algorithms for his hedge fund. His mathematical approach was directly descended from cryptanalysis techniques, but the underlying optimization methods were similar to our nuclear weapons work. He spoke about financial markets the way we had talked about nuclear reactions, as complex systems whose behavior could be predicted through mathematical modeling. The market is a machine, Simons explained during one memorable lunch. It processes information according to mathematical rules. If you can understand those rules, if you can model them accurately, you can predict the machine's behavior. It's no different from modeling any other complex physical system. The results were extraordinary. Quantitative hedge funds using our mathematical techniques consistently outperformed traditional investment approaches. Computer-driven trading strategies generated profits that seemed almost magical to observers who didn't understand the mathematical sophistication behind them. Wall Street was being transformed by the same optimization algorithms that had once optimized nuclear destruction. But I began to notice troubling parallels between nuclear weapons and quantitative finance. Both involved mathematical models of unprecedented sophistication, applied to systems with enormous destructive potential. Both concentrated vast power in the hands of those who understood the mathematics. Both created systemic risks that extended far beyond their immediate applications. The Black-Scholes equation for options pricing, developed in the early 1970s, was mathematically related to the heat diffusion equations we had used to model neutron behavior. The same differential equation techniques, the same statistical assumptions, the same mathematical framework. Watching options markets explode in size and complexity, I felt like I was witnessing the financial equivalent of nuclear proliferation. I consulted on increasingly sophisticated projects, programmed trading systems that used our optimization algorithms to execute thousands of transactions per second, risk management models that applied our statistical techniques to massive portfolios, derivative pricing models that used our computational methods to evaluate complex financial instruments. Each project pushed the mathematics further. Portfolio optimization with hundreds of variables using techniques derived from our multidimensional nuclear calculations. Statistical arbitrage strategies based on correlation analysis using methods we had developed to predict neutron interaction.
Automated trading systems that implemented decision algorithms originally designed for nuclear targeting.
The financial engineers I worked with were brilliant, mathematically sophisticated, and largely oblivious to the origins of their tools. They saw elegant mathematical solutions to complex optimization problems. They didn't see the lineage connecting their portfolio models to nuclear weapons design. They were using our mathematics without understanding its history or questioning its implications. By the mid-1970s, quantitative methods dominated large portions of Wall Street. Mathematical models determined trading strategies, risk assessments, and investment allocations. Computer algorithms executed trades faster and more efficiently than human traders.
The financial industry had become dependent on mathematical techniques originally created for nuclear weapons.
I watched this transformation with mixed feelings. The mathematics was being used constructively, generating wealth rather than destruction. But the concentration of power in mathematical models created new kinds of systemic risk. Financial markets were becoming as complex and potentially unstable as nuclear weapon systems. The 1987 stock market crash provided a sobering reminder of these risks. Portfolio insurance strategies based on mathematical models derived from our optimization techniques amplified market volatility and contributed to the severity of the crash. Computer-driven selling, following algorithmic rules similar to our nuclear targeting protocols, created feedback loops that traditional markets couldn't handle. Standing in my office watching the market collapse, I realized that we had created more than we intended. Our mathematical innovations hadn't just spread to new applications. They had become integral to the infrastructure of modern capitalism. The same optimization algorithms that had once calculated optimal nuclear destruction were now calculating optimal financial strategies for millions of investors. The mathematics had evolved, but its power remained concentrated in the hands of those who understood its true capabilities. Wall Street's quantitative revolution was really a nuclear mathematics revolution in disguise. And like nuclear weapons, it carried risks that extended far beyond its immediate application. The equations that split atoms were now splitting financial markets into winners and losers with mathematical precision. The quantum computing research paper arrived in my email this morning, 8 decades after I first arrived at Los Alamos. The mathematical techniques described in the paper, optimization algorithms for quantum systems, statistical models for quantum behavior, computational approaches for quantum error correction, were unmistakably descended from the work we had done with nuclear physics in 1943. The equations that split atoms were now being used to build computers that could split reality itself. At 95 years old, I've watched our nuclear mathematics evolve through every major technological revolution of the past 8 decades. From atomic weapons to electronic computers, from Wall Street trading to internet infrastructure, from algorithmic surveillance to artificial intelligence. Each generation discovers our mathematical techniques anew, applies them to their particular challenges, and pushes them further than we ever imagined possible. The quantum computing paper was written by researchers at IBM who were using optimization techniques to control quantum states. The mathematical framework was identical to approaches we had developed for nuclear physics. Statistical mechanics applied to systems with probabilistic behavior, optimization methods for complex multivariable problems, computational techniques for handling massive uncertainty. But these researchers were applying our mathematics to build computers that could solve problems beyond the reach of any classical computer. Optimization problems with billions of variables, statistical analysis of data sets larger than all human knowledge, cryptographic calculations that could break every security system in existence. The mathematical power we had unlocked at Los Alamos was still growing, still evolving, still finding new applications that we had never anticipated.
The young quantum researchers had no idea that their optimization algorithms traced back to nuclear weapons research. They saw elegant mathematical solutions to quantum engineering problems. They didn't see the historical lineage connecting their quantum computers to atomic bombs.
Sitting in my home office, surrounded by 80 years of mathematical evolution, I reflected on what we had truly accomplished at Los Alamos. We hadn't just built nuclear weapons. We had unlocked mathematical techniques so powerful, so general, so applicable, that they became the foundation for every major technological advancement that followed.
Nuclear weapons were just the first application of mathematical methods that would eventually transform every aspect of human civilization. The optimization algorithms, statistical models, and computational techniques we developed for destruction became the invisible infrastructure of construction, building everything from global communication networks to artificial intelligence systems. The pattern was always the same. Mathematicians would encounter a complex problem that required sophisticated analytical techniques. They would independently rediscover optimization methods, statistical approaches, and computational strategies that we had originally developed for nuclear physics. They would apply these techniques to their particular domain and achieve breakthrough results.
Then the mathematical innovations would spread to other applications, creating new technological capabilities and new problems that required even more sophisticated mathematics.
Each technological revolution built on our mathematical foundation while extending it in new directions. Electronic computers amplified our calculations. Internet protocols automated our optimization algorithms. Financial markets applied our risk assessment techniques. Surveillance systems scaled our pattern recognition methods. Machine learning algorithms evolved our statistical models. Now, artificial intelligence was taking our mathematics to its logical conclusion. Mathematical systems sophisticated enough to improve themselves, to discover new mathematical techniques, to solve optimization problems beyond human understanding. The neural networks powering modern AI systems used backpropagation algorithms that were mathematically descended from our nuclear physics work. The same mathematical logic that had optimized nuclear chain reactions was now optimizing artificial neural network. I had consulted with OpenAI, Google DeepMind, and Anthropic on the mathematical foundations of artificial intelligence. Each conversation revealed familiar patterns. Optimization techniques descended from our nuclear research. Statistical models evolved from our probability calculations. Computational approaches that traced back to our weapons work. The AI researchers were using our mathematics to build systems that could think mathematically, creating artificial minds powered by atomic mathematics. The implications were both promising and terrifying. Artificial intelligence systems built on our nuclear mathematics could solve optimization problems that would benefit humanity, drug discovery, climate modeling, resource allocation, scientific research. But they could also solve optimization problems that would concentrate unprecedented power, mass surveillance, autonomous weapons, economic manipulation, social control. The mathematical genie we had released at Los Alamos could never be contained. Each new application of our techniques created possibilities for even more powerful applications. Mathematical innovation had its own momentum, its own logic, its own inexorable progression toward capabilities that we couldn't predict or control. Standing at my window, looking out at a world transformed by mathematics we had developed to destroy it, I thought about the responsibility of mathematical innovation. Every equation we wrote at Los Alamos carried consequences that extended far beyond our intentions. Every optimization algorithm we developed would eventually optimize systems we had never considered. Every statistical model we created would eventually model phenomena we had never imagined. The young mathematicians working on quantum computing, artificial intelligence, and other emerging technologies were repeating our experience. They were creating mathematical techniques for specific applications without fully understanding the long-term implications. Their optimization algorithms would eventually optimize systems they hadn't considered. Their statistical models would eventually model behaviors they hadn't anticipated. Mathematical power, once unleashed, finds its own applications. It cannot be contained to its original purpose. It cannot be prevented from spreading to new domains. It cannot be controlled by its creators. But mathematical innovation also carries the possibility of solutions to humanity's greatest challenges. The same optimization techniques that had once optimized destruction could now optimize sustainability, healthcare, education, and human flourishing. The same statistical methods that had once modeled nuclear reactions could now model climate systems, disease transmission, and social dynamics.
The same computational approaches that had once calculated weapons effects could now calculate solutions to poverty, inequality, and environmental degradation. The choice was not whether to continue mathematical innovation. That was inevitable. The choice was how to develop mathematical techniques responsibly, with full awareness of their potential applications and implications. How to create mathematical tools that would benefit humanity rather than control or destroy it. I had spent my career watching our nuclear mathematics evolve through every technological revolution of the modern era. Now, in my final years, I was watching a new generation of mathematicians develop techniques that would shape the next 80 years of human technological development. The quantum computing researchers would discover that their optimization algorithms could solve problems far beyond quantum engineering. The artificial intelligence developers would find that their neural networks could model systems far beyond their original applications. The biotechnology mathematicians would realize that their statistical models could analyze phenomena far beyond biological systems. Mathematical innovation would continue its inexorable progression, creating capabilities that we couldn't yet imagine and consequences that we couldn't yet predict. The equations that split atoms would continue to split open new technological possibilities, new opportunities for human flourishing, and new challenges for human wisdom. The mathematics we had developed at Los Alamos to end one war had become the foundation for every technological advance that followed. It had transformed human civilization in ways we had never intended and could never have predicted. The apocalypse math had indeed taken control of our world, but it had not brought apocalypse. It had brought transformation beyond our wildest calculations. The numbers that split atoms had become the numbers that split open the future itself.